Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, notes, and, well, we boil it all down. We extract the most important bits to help you get informed, properly informed, quickly. Today we're tackling one of the big ones, the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's incredibly complex, deeply rooted.
It really is.
Our mission here is to unpack it, give you the essential context so you can, really grasp the different layers.
And it's quite a story. We're talking millennia, really. Deeply tangled history, politics, social factors. The sources we've got lay out the origins, the key moments, the situation now. It's all about providing that crucial context.
Right.
Think of it as maybe a way to quickly get up to speed on the core narratives driving things even today.
Okay, let's dive in then. So our sources cover literally thousands of years. Where does this story even begin? I mean, we're talking about that land, historical Palestine, right? Between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
A place that's been home to Jews, Christians, and Muslims for, well, forever, it feels like.
It does. And for a very long time, leading up to the modern era, say from the 16th century right up until World War I, that whole area was actually part of the Ottoman Empire.
Right, the Ottomans.
Yeah, a huge empire. And that period, that long stretch under Ottoman rule, it's a really important piece of the puzzle. Often gets a bit glossed over.
Okay, and then World War I happens, the Ottoman Empire collapses, and Britain steps in.
Correct. Britain takes control under what was called a League of Nations mandate. So they were essentially governing Palestine from about 1917 through to 1948.
And right around then, 1917, something pretty significant happens, doesn't it? The Balfour Declaration.
Yes, pivotal. Absolutely pivotal. While Britain's still kind of sorting out its control, they issue this declaration, and it openly supports, and this is the famous phrase, a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
A national home.
But here's the crucial part, the bit that creates immediate tension. The declaration also says, nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities.
So right there, you've got these two seemingly conflicting promises baked in from the start.
Exactly. A commitment to two, well, fundamentally opposing ideas, right, from 1917. And that inherent contradiction, you could argue, it just echoes right down through the decades. It's a conflict of promises, really.
Okay, so that declaration is out there. Now tell us about Zionism. How does that movement fit into this picture, especially as things progress?
Well, Zionism, at its heart, is the movement for the return of Jewish people to what they consider their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel.
Right.
But it's more than just historical land. For Zionists, it's deeply tied to religious identity, culture, and importantly, it was also a response to centuries of anti-Semitism and persecution in Europe and elsewhere.
So this drive leads to more people actually moving there?
Yes, significant waves of Jewish immigration into Palestine, particularly between, say, 1882 and 1948. It wasn't just a trickle, it was substantial.
And what was the effect on the ground with this increasing immigration?
Well, as you might expect, tensions definitely ramped up. The sources show quite a bit of friction growing between the Jewish immigrants and the Arab Palestinians who'd been living there for generations.
Understandable.
Yeah, the Arab Palestinians, they feared losing their land, their national identity. What's really striking is how these early movements, these demographic shifts, they didn't just bring people into proximity. They sort of solidified competing national claims to the same land. It really set the stage.
So competing claims, rising tensions, and then the international community gets involved again. The UN Partition Plan, 1947. What was the plan there? What did they try to do?
Okay, so the UN steps in and proposes dividing the land. The plan was for two states, a Jewish state, which would get about 55% of the territory, and an Arab state with the remaining 45%.
And Jerusalem, always a key point.
Jerusalem was designated as a separate entity in corpus separatum to be under international administration because of its importance to all three religions.
Okay, two states, international Jerusalem. How is that received?
This is the critical divergence. The Jewish leadership, they accepted the plan, albeit perhaps with some reservations. But the Palestinians and the surrounding Arab nations, they rejected it outright.
Why the rejection from the Arab side?
Well, from their perspective, they saw it as fundamentally unjust, giving away more than half the land, including major agricultural areas, to a minority population, many of whom were recent immigrants. They viewed it as a continuation of colonial patterns. It really highlights that deep disagreement about the future, about who the land rightfully belonged to.
A fundamental disagreement.
Yeah.
Okay, so the plan is rejected by one side. Fast forward just a little bit. May 14th, 1948, Israel declares independence. What happens literally the next day?
The very next day, armies from neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, they invade. This kicks off the first Arab-Israeli war, known by Israelis as the War of Independence.
The outcome of that war.
Profound. Israel not only defended its existence, but actually ended up controlling more territory than the UN partition plan had originally allocated. About 78% of historical Palestine.
And for the Palestinians.
A catastrophe. This is what Palestinians call the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes in the territory that became Israel. They became refugees.
And the remaining territories, the West Bank and Gaza.
Right. After the war, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, came under Jordanian control, and the Gaza Strip came under Egyptian control. So the map was completely redrawn, and the Palestinian state envisioned by the UN never materialized.
So that war clearly didn't resolve anything long term. It just created new realities, new grievances. And that leads us to another major conflict, the Six-Day War in 1967. This one seems to change the map again dramatically.
It really does. A very short war, just 6 days, but with massive consequences. Israel fought against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan.
And the results on the ground.
Israel achieved a swift and decisive victory. They captured the West Bank and, crucially, East Jerusalem from Jordan. They took the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria.
Wow, that's a huge amount of territory changing hands.
It was. And connecting this to the bigger picture, this war marks the beginning of Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip Palestinian territories. That occupation, starting in 1967, becomes a central, perhaps the central issue in the conflict moving forward. Still is today.
Decades of occupation. Okay. Amidst all this conflict, were there any serious attempts at peace? Let's talk about the Oslo Accords in the 90s.
Yes, the Oslo Accords, signed in 93 and 95, were a major moment, a real breakthrough, seemingly. These were agreements signed between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO.
What did they actually agree on?
Well, a key thing was the creation of the Palestinian Authority, the PA. The idea was for the PA to have limited self-governance in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. Sort of interim self-rule.
Interim, so not a final settlement.
Exactly, and this is crucial. Oslo promised a future Palestinian state, but it deliberately deferred the really difficult final status issues. Things like the exact borders, the status of Jerusalem, Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and the very sensitive issue of Palestinian refugees.
They kicked the hardest cans down the road, essentially.
You could say that. They created a framework, some hope, but left the core problems unresolved. And unfortunately, that left fertile ground for future conflict.
Which brings us to the Second Intifada, starting in 2000. What sparked that and what happened?
Well, the peace process stalled after Oslo. Frustrations grew. The trigger is often cited as a visit by Ariel Sharon, who was then the Israeli opposition leader, to the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, in Jerusalem. A very sensitive site.
And that sparked violence.
Widespread violence, yes. From roughly 2000 to 2005, it was a period of intense conflict. Suicide bombings, military incursions, thousands were killed on both sides, Israelis and Palestinians.
And major consequences beyond the casualties.
Definitely. Israel began constructing the West Bank barrier, a separation wall or fence, citing security needs. And Gaza, during and after this period, became increasingly isolated, economically devastated, and unstable. It sort of set the stage for what happened next there.
Which was the rise of Hamas. Tell us about their role, especially in Gaza.
Right. Hamas, which is an Islamist group, designated as a terrorist organization by many countries, had always opposed Oslo. They won Palestinian legislative elections in 2006.
Won the election.
Yes, surprising many observers. Then, in 2007, after internal fighting with Fatah, the party leading the PA, Hamas took full, forceful control of the Gaza Strip.
So a split. The PA in the West Bank, Hamas in Gaza.
Effectively, yes. A political and geographical split. And following Hamas's takeover, Israel and Egypt imposed a strict blockade on Gaza, controlling borders, imports, exports, movement of people.
And since then?
Since then, there have been multiple devastating wars between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The major rounds were in 2008-09, 2012, 2014, 2021, and then the very large-scale conflict that erupted in late 2023 and continued into 2024. Each one brought immense suffering, especially for civilians in Gaza.
Okay, so that brings us closer to the present. We've traced this incredibly long history. Based on our sources, what are the absolute core issues, the main disputes, that are still preventing any kind of resolution today? There seem to be about 5 key ones.
Yes, the sources consistently point to these 5, and they're all deeply interconnected. Understanding these is, well, Essential.
Let's break them down first.
First, borders.
Right.
There's no agreement on the final borders between Israel and a potential future Palestinian state. Palestinians generally want borders based on the pre-1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as their capital. Israel hasn't agreed to this.
Okay. Borders.
Jerusalem. Extremely sensitive. Both sides claim Jerusalem as their capital. Israel claims the whole city, having annexed East Jerusalem, though this isn't internationally recognized. Palestinians want East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. Its religious significance for Jews, Muslims, and Christians just adds layers of complexity.
Incredibly complex. Third issue.
Settlements. These are Israeli communities built on land in the West Bank that was captured in 1967. There are hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers living there now.
And the issue there is
Palestinians and most of the international community view these settlements as illegal under international law, specifically the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power transferring its population into occupied territory. They see them as a major obstacle to a viable Palestinian state. Israel disputes the illegality and cites historical and security claims to the land.
right, a huge point of contention. Fourth.
Refugees.
Yeah.
This refers to the Palestinians and their descendants who fled or were expelled in 1948, and also those displaced in 1967. There are now millions, maybe over 5 million, registered with the UN.
And they demand.
They demand the right of return, based partly on UN Resolution 194, to return to their homes or receive compensation. For Israel, allowing a mass return poses what they see as an existential demographic threat to the country's Jewish character. It's an incredibly emotive issue for both sides.
Deeply emotive. Okay, and the fifth key issue.
Security. Israel faces ongoing security threats, rocket attacks from Gaza, potential threats from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and concerns about stability in the West Bank. So Israel insists on security arrangements that protect its citizens, which often involves maintaining military control over areas and borders. Palestinians argue that security cannot come at the expense of their freedom and rights.
So borders, Jerusalem, settlements, refugees, and security. It's clear how tangled these all are.
Absolutely. You can't really solve one without addressing the others. They're completely interwoven. It's not just about land. It's about identity, historical narratives, justice, and basic security needs perceived differently by each side.
Which makes finding a comprehensive solution incredibly difficult. So bringing us right up to today, 2025, what's the snapshot? What's the current state of play according to the sources?
Well, Israel still occupies the West Bank, although the Palestinian Authority has that limited self-rule in parts of it, mostly urban areas. Gaza remains under Hamas control internally, but is subject to that ongoing strict blockade by Israel and Egypt, leading to dire humanitarian conditions.
And the violence.
It continues. Frequent clashes in the West Bank, tensions around Jerusalem, periodic escalations involving rocket fire from Gaza and Israeli military responses. The sources are really clear. The human cost is immense, overwhelmingly borne by civilians on both sides, but particularly Palestinians given the power imbalance.
And a final peace deal.
Still nowhere in sight, unfortunately. Despite decades of efforts, no comprehensive agreement has been reached. The core issues we just discussed remain fundamentally unresolved, and deep mistrust persists.
What an incredibly deep, complex, and frankly tragic story. A century-old struggle, really, over land, identity, statehood. The historical roots run so deep, and the human cost just keeps mounting. Hopefully walking through this gives you, our listener, a clearer frame.
It really is a lot to absorb, and maybe, as a final thought for you to mull over, consider this. Now that we've unpacked these specific historical moments, the Balfour Declaration, the 48 War, the 67 War, Oslo, the Intifadas, and these ongoing key issues like settlements and refugees, how does that knowledge, that specific context, maybe reshape how you read the news or interpret the current events unfolding in the region?
That's a great point.
It really underscores how history isn't just backstory here. It's actively shaping the present reality every single day.